everyone. Just for the record, I am not Lance Lynn, and I'm not throwing the first pitch out. For our viewing audience, we're recording this during the Cardinals playoffs, so you may hear a few Cardinals references throughout the day. So, first of all, my name is Ray Comiskey, president here at Jefferson College, and I want to welcome you to our October speaker series. We're thrilled that you're here and that you did, in fact, give up the opportunity to fight parking downtown to watch a baseball game and rather come here and hear one of our faculty speak. And we have a great crowd today, and I think that's a great reflection of the quality and interest that people have not only in the subject but also in our presenter today. And we even have a few students in the back of the room who are going to sit in. I don't know if they get extra credit or not. They may negotiate that with you later. Patty, I'm not sure. Well, our speaker today is Dr. Patricia McDaniel, and she's a professor in the biology department here at Jefferson College. She was the college's 2012 recipient of the Governor's Award for Excellence in Teaching, and this is her 10-year anniversary as a Jefferson College employee. Professor McDaniel earned her PhD from St. Louis University and her master's and bachelor's from Southeast Missouri State. She's a longtime resident of the area, having attended grade school through high school in Festus. Today she will present a summary of her conservation education programs prior to coming to the college, and will discuss her most recent conservation endeavors both here and abroad. Her presentation is entitled Conservation Education, a Global Perspective. Dr. Patricia McDaniel.
Thanks so much, Dr. Comiskey. I appreciate the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm happy to be here to speak with you. Thanks for having me. I want to talk to you this afternoon about conservation education and look at a global perspective. But I always like to start with the idea about education in general, and I take pride in being an educator. I think education is a great profession, and I think it's one of the professions. I was talking to somebody the other day, how many professions give you that much bang for your buck, right? It's a great thing, investing in education, right, for the future. So education in general, and I'm going to talk about conservation education, which is sort of an aspect of conservation as it relates to conservation programs. And we're going to go on a trip, so I hope everybody's packed and ready to go. We're going to go visit a few countries, okay? But first, I want to talk about a little bit about the who, what, where, when, how, why of conservation education and what that is. Over the years before coming to Jefferson College, I had some excellent opportunities to be involved in conservation work in other countries. And conservation education has always been an integral component of conservation work, right? A component whereby you're empowering individuals, teaching them about the importance of conservation and environmental issues we have out there. So we're going to start sort of taking that trip, answering some questions, and I think that with many things, an important thing is to start with a concrete definition that helps us then look at some abstract kind of components to it. So looking at what exactly is conservation education, okay? Conservation education can be thought of different ways. It can be thought of as education about natural resources, and the wise use and management of resources. That is part of the definition of what conservation is. It implies use of resources, right, on our planet, and it implies wise use and management of those resources. That's according to the Department of Education from Madison, Wisconsin. And here's a big one. You don't have to read all that. But in general, this is from the U.S. government, from Education Resources Information Council. That's a big one, isn't it? Right? The study of man's, and they're using that in the generic term, intelligent use of his natural environment through the development, management, preservation, and renewal of natural resources for his material, cultural, and aesthetic needs to benefit present and future generations. That's a mouthful, right? That's a mouthful. And included in that definition, which I think is interesting, is the idea of the future, right? The idea of sustainability, using resources, but in a sustainable fashion so that they are available for future generations down the road. So we can think of it, and there are several other definitions, but what they all have in common is this idea of education about resources and the wise use of our resources. And when we talk about conservation education, who do we serve, right? What aspect out there of populations do we serve? And it serves several, right? We serve students, we serve educators, okay? We serve conservation professionals and community members. And what I'm going to focus on today, I tried to bring in and provide you some examples of conservation education in different countries that I've been involved in, involving those different components of individuals out there, okay? A purpose. What's this all about, right? Why do we do this? Well, the point is to provide resources such as information on environmental issues or conservation strategies. How do we deal with some of the problems that we have out there regarding conservation and environmental issues? Next, to me, this is an extremely significant component, is the idea of improving the capacity of individuals in their various roles, whether they're students, educators, conservation professionals, or who they are. The idea is to empower individuals, right? Empower individuals. And then, hopefully, what we're doing with this is promoting effective conservation and natural resource stewardship, taking care of our resources out there. And hopefully, one of the things we like to do in conservation education is not only promote an awareness of the issues, but hopefully, individuals form an appreciation and a relationship with nature and natural resources, because we find that's when we're most effective, is that when we have sort of those end results. Conservation education, we're going to go abroad, right? Pack your bags. It's a cheap trip, by the way. It cost you your lunch today, right? So you don't even have to pack those bags and get in a plane. But first, right, let's look at conservation education close to home, really close to home, as a matter of fact, okay? When I first came to the college, a couple of years into my tenure here at the college, I had the opportunity to be involved in implementation of service learning at the college. I don't know if anybody who's here remembers that, right? The implementation of service learning here. And so I jumped on board with that along with some other faculty members at the college, and we went our separate ways and developed what we call service learning projects. It involves service to the community, and the students must learn appropriate material at the same time. So I was anxious to get involved with that, dealing with conservation, since that had been my background for many years. So I was teaching, and still am, ecology and environmental conservation course here at the college. And I met with the Hillsborough R3 primary school system and specific instructors in that system, and talked to them about the possibility of working on service learning. And I knew that they had an outdoor classroom that they had been developing over the years, and I thought this is a great opportunity for us. They have an outdoor classroom. They had worked with the Missouri Department of Conservation in implementing an outdoor classroom. That's a big push these days. We're seeing more and more outdoor classrooms, primary schools, secondary schools implementing those. And so what our group decided to do, our course decided to do, is I spent some time with the educators. We went out and visited the outdoor classroom. My class did. We met with the teachers. We spent some time out there and sort of formulated an idea of how could we best serve that program. And what we decided was they had in their outdoor classroom individuals like the Boy Scouts, I think, and some other groups had started helping them identify specific things, like here's this species of tree, right? Here's this other sort of variable that was out there. And we decided that we would take a process approach. Here's how it works, right? Here's how a stream functions. Here's the importance of that decomposing log that you see there. So the class was great. We developed a field guide for teachers' use, for the teachers to use, and this is what it looked like in the end. So we presented that to the primary school system for their teachers to use, specifically with the outdoor classroom, and it was called the Nature Trail Eco Guide for the teachers. So I was really happy to be involved with that, right here, right down the road from us. So now, let's take a look at going to some other places, okay? We're going to go to Venezuela. You'll boy, oh boy, you're going to take a big trip today once again, right? We're going to Venezuela, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Panama is where we're going to end up most recently. So I just came back this summer from some conservation education work in Panama. So that's where we're going to end today. So let's take a look, and I'm asked this question. I think this is a reasonable question. Why international emphasis, right, for conservation and conservation education? And there are several reasons. First of all, it is widespread that in these countries there is a lack of resources and opportunities for individuals. Populations consist largely of impoverished and disenfranchised groups. And I'll give you some examples as we go along the way today. And I can't forget, I'm a biologist, right, who has worked in conservation for, 20-something years now, I guess, off and on. And I know that tropical areas contain the majority of the planet's diversity in life forms and the majority of our planet's cultural diversity, different groups of people on our planet. What I also know is happening is rapid destruction of tropical habitats are changing forever. Not only the diversity and processes in those places, but it's estimated that we're losing one indigenous group per year, right? One indigenous group per year. So, but on to happier things. Let's talk about some of these programs and some of the components of them, okay? So here's where we're going. I'll show you where we're going on our maps today. So we're starting in Venezuela. Okay, and we're going to go to two locations. We're going on the border with Colombia, okay, and then we're going up into the Andes Mountains, okay. Next, we're going to move to Central America, to Costa Rica, right, working in the northwestern part of Costa Rica. Then we're going to Guatemala. We're going to be looking at work done in the Petén region. This is where Tikal and the Mayan communities have been and still are. Going then to Nicaragua, we're going to two locations in Nicaragua. We're going to an island in the middle of Lago Nicaragua, or Nicaragua Lake, and then we're going to an area up on the border with Honduras that is totally indigenous peoples only in that area. Finally, ending up in Panama, in Bocas del Toro, where I came back from this summer. Okay, so let's start in Venezuela. Okay, in an area called Caparo. This is very close to the Colombian border. And this is really where I started out my conservation education work after I got my PhD. This is an area, this is the Caparo River. This is an important area in Venezuela. It is what we call a biodiversity preserve area. It means significant types of diversity there that is a hands-off. A preserve is different than, right? Preservation is different than conservation. Conservation implies wise use and management. Preservation implies a more hands-off approach. So when you see preserves or conservation areas, you have a little better understanding of what you can do in those areas. So in the Caparo region, one of the first things I did after earning my PhD and getting my first position was I wanted to develop a conservation education course for university students in the United States. So I worked with a university in Ohio, I worked with the Cleveland Zoo, and I worked with a university in Venezuela. And together we put together a program in conservation education for university students. And what I liked so much about this program was it was what we call a team-taught program, where we taught as professors in the United States alongside professors in Venezuela. And so our university students were also learning along with Venezuelan university students. It's a great cultural exchange. They work together on research projects. And here you can see we were team teaching. We did this for years, right? For 5-6 years, we did this program, all of us together, formulating great relationships. So here are the students, and they're listening to one of our professors from University of the Andes who taught wildlife. And here we are, these are some of my students, and this is a quite famous botanist from Venezuela who is very well known at the Missouri Botanical Gardens. So it's a small world when you get out there in the field of conservation. And just as an aside, this is one of my students, And she went on this, she was an undergraduate at this point. She went on to earn her PhD. She did research in Venezuela, and now she's gainfully employed as a professor in conservation. So, yay! There are success stories out there. Just one example. And now take you on a little bit different location and a little different type of program. We're going to the Andes Mountains, and Venezuela is the northernmost part of the Andes Mountains range in South America. It's an amazing area, so I lived for some years there. And does anybody recognize? Condor. It's a condor, right? It's the Andean condor. Andean condors are the largest, most robust bird of flight on the planet. And when I was living down there working on conservation programs, one of the things we knew is that Venezuela had only 10 individuals still left in the wild, Andean condors. So we worked to start developing a captive breeding and reintroduction program for Andean condors back into Venezuela. So we worked at the top of the Andes Mountains in Venezuela, and we worked with individuals from within Venezuela. Again, we have partners, and partnerships, forming partnerships really adds to the success of conservation and conservation education in general. So here's the field station, and I don't know how well you can see it, but this is a giant sort of caged area. Can you see that? So that we call that a semi-captive breeding area where we would raise condors, and then when they got to be a certain age, we would release them back out into the wild. And if we're doing that, again, one of the significant things about conservation and hopefully success with programs like this is education components. What we knew was happening is that condors were being killed. Okay, so I went to the zoo, right? Heavily visited, second most heavily visited zoo in Venezuela. This is up in the Andes Mountains. I'm at the zoo here looking out, and can you see the snow-capped peaks in the distance there? What an amazing scene to have for a zoo. And so many people visit this, we knew it would be a great place to implement an education program about condors, right, and about other wildlife that we saw disappearing. We were working on those conservation programs as well. So this is the kind of visitation they would get on a regular basis. Tourists from all over the country would come, school groups came, but they had very few resources in conservation education. So I was there, I lived there for some years and worked with this zoo, not only the zoo, but I got involved with a local tourism agency, and I worked with them to develop a series of conservation education lessons and activities for the public to engage in. And one of the important things was sort of promoting those programs. So there were interviews, and then they would write newspaper articles about it. We pulled in lots of people into the zoo area, and I remember one of the things that we did that I think was very effective was since a condor's wingspan is the max I think ever recorded is 14 feet, right? 14 feet. When they fly overhead, when we'd be out in the field and they'd fly overhead, it was like a light plane flying. You'd hear flying over your head. So in helping people form a relationship with nature, what I thought would be great was we made a huge banner the size of an Andean condor. And then, did everything exactly coloration, everything like the condor is, and then the people would come up and they would start to stand in front of the condor, right, and decide, oh my gosh, it's this much bigger than I am. We also would talk about the significance of the Andean condor in their culture and in their history. It's a symbol that is used everywhere in South American countries, right, where the Andes Mountains run through. The condor is very important. So once again, sometimes what's important in conservation education is knowing what's significant in the country you're working at, what are the issues and problems that those people are facing, what kind of resources do they have available, what kind of things can we implement that are really cost effective for them to use. So I like conservation for many reasons. One of is it has a basis in science, in biology, of course, right, and some other sciences as well, but it's so much more than that. It's psychology, it's sociology, it's politics, it's history, it's culture, it's being immersed in the area and with the people and forming partnerships, and I love all of those aspects of it. It makes it challenging, but it's extremely rewarding. Now we're going to Costa Rica. Okay, so after I moved from Venezuela, I was asked to start teaching field courses in Costa Rica. So for some years, I taught in an area of Costa Rica called La Suerte. You saw that little star on the map. And this was the first course I ever developed totally and taught totally on my own. So this is my first sort of cohort of students that came out of this program. And so I have my students, and one of the things, this is a month-long intensive field course that teaches students conservation methods. And one of the things that I decided would always be a component of my conservation programs and courses would be education. So we work with the local school. It's the La Primavera School, you can see up there. And we developed a series of education activities and lessons for the local school kids. The kids love it, the teachers love it. They then can incorporate some of those lessons that we have that are so cost effective into their own curriculum. And along with these ideas, we usually always play sports. They love to play sports, right? Integral components. We collect money and go buy locally school supplies for the schools, because rarely do all the kids have school supplies. And I would say in most of the places I've worked and taught, most of the schools and students do not have textbooks. And in many cases, they have no pencils and they have no paper to write on, right? They're lucky if they have shoes. So it's so important, right, that we're providing resources to those people. From there, Guatemala, went to Guatemala. I just pack my bags and I go everywhere, wherever they need me, I'm going. So I went to an area called Huaxactún, okay? And strange spelling, but this is a Mayan area. This is a Mayan and Latino community still to this day. Huaxactún houses some extremely important Mayan ruins and artifacts. And when you climb the top of the fire tower in Huaxactún, I could look out and see the pyramids in Tikal, right, which is an amazing area where the Mayan pyramids are. So in this community, again, indigenous peoples, globally are the most exploited, oppressed people on the planet, and those most likely to lack resources and opportunities, so we worked with this community. And one of the things we did, again, working with local partners from St. Louis area. This is a professor. He and I and a couple of other professors from the University of Missouri St. Louis, he's from St. Louis University, we put together a field course for Latin American professionals. Latin American professionals who had positions in conservation. And so the course was taught, month-long intensive field course, taught totally in Spanish. And here are some of our students that we had. So he's still a professor. He's a professor at St. Louis University, still to this day. And so we incorporated into this month-long field course for Latin American professionals, right? Conservation education for the local schools, again, right? Building partnerships with the local schools. And I love this. The students spent days in the school system. I would go check out what they were doing. They would talk to the kids and the teachers and find out kind of what were the issues that they had there, what were the things that were important to them. And then they surprised the kids, and they came back to the school one day. Those are the two individuals. Do you see them in hats? 3 individuals in hats. They came back dressed as tourists. The kids knew who they were, but said, "We're tourists today. Tell us all about your area," right? The pride of Huaxactún. What do you have here? What can we do? What do you want us to know about your area? What's significant? What kind of important resources are here, and what do you take pride in? So it was a great education program. I love sort of guiding the students and allowing them to come up with the lessons and activities on their own. I've seen some incredibly creative students come out of these programs. And this is one of the things they did. They worked with the local kids to write a song. And of course, it's in Spanish, but in general, what it says is, Huaxactún You are a jewel of the Petén. That's the region in Guatemala. Washocktun, for you I work. You have beautiful animals. This is a beautiful area. Again, instilling pride in the local people, making them feel really good about what they have. We always sort of engender, we hope, a feeling of pride in the community. And one thing that's important when we go in is to tell them how fortunate we feel to be there. We are so lucky to be here with you. And we're here because you have an amazing area, your people are wonderful. Instilling that pride is so important, and empowering people. Okay, now we're moving to Nicaragua. We're moving to Ometepe, that little island that you saw that exists in the middle of Lake Nicaragua, Lago Nicaragua. It's one of the largest freshwater lakes on the planet. It's enormous. It's like you're surrounded by ocean. It's that big. And next to Haiti, Nicaragua is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And I lived there for some years working, and I know for a fact how impoverished these people are. Many of them are subsistence farmers. Most are unemployed. That's not atypical in indigenous communities and Latino communities in some of these poorer countries. So I taught a course here, university students from the United States. And one of the things that we incorporated again was a conservation education program for everybody on the island. So the word got out that we were going to do conservation education, and we were setting up all kinds of displays for the students. They have no transportation, but it's amazing, word travels fast. There's no phone or anything. So everybody heard that we were going to come around. We rented a cattle truck. I mean, you have to have a big thing, right? I mean, we rented a cattle truck, one of the only things that could make its way around the dirt roads on the island. We drove around the entire island, and everybody knew who wanted to come stood out on the edge, right, of the paths leading to their houses that day, and got in the cattle truck, and we took everybody back to the field station. And then my students, again, using their creativity, developed all kinds of opportunities, learning opportunities for the students. This one, great student of mine, excellent, Jeremy, I still remember him, set up some of his displays so the kids could look at insects under the microscope, most of whom will never have the opportunity to look under a microscope ever in their lives. Another important thing is we collect money, right, and provide that to the school, or in this case, as is typical, people are hungry, and we usually always feed people too, right? Provide food, any kind of clothing, and school materials. So important. When you live and work in places like these, you start realizing how incredibly fortunate we are, right? It's a good lesson for everybody out there. Before I came to Jefferson College, about a year before I came to Jefferson College, I had been working for a couple of years in another area of Nicaragua called Bosawas. And Bosawas is a fascinating place. It is an extremely remote area on the Honduran-Nicaraguan border, and it is inhabited strictly by Mosquito and Mayangna indigenous peoples. It is Mosquito and Mayangna territories only. It comprises about a quarter of the size of the entire country, right, is indigenous territories. And it is so remote. I was fortunate enough to be coordinator of the program, living down there. So this was how I got to work. It was 1 day by automobile, 3 days by dugout canoe, because there are no cars, right? There are no roads. There are no roads, there are no cars. You travel down the Rio Coco that divides Honduras from Nicaragua. So it would take us 3 days to get there. There's no electricity, there's no running water, there's no anything in a lot of these very remote areas. And what we did here, we were working to help the Mosquito and Mayangna people maintain their cultural, historical lifestyles. So we were working with, I was working with the St. Louis Zoo, I was working with USAID, the Nature Conservancy, and then St. Louis University and University of Missouri St. Louis, and the Missouri Botanical Garden jumped on board for this project, and it became an enormous program. And what we did was, there were many components to the program, but we did a couple of things that pertain specifically to education. So the conservation education component was, we actually had our field people would go into the field and train Mosquito and Mayangna indigenous males, because it's appropriate in culture for males to be train indigenous males in how to do research, conduct research, and then we actually employed them to provide an income for them, right? To further sort of promote saving their resources and giving them a financial incentive, an economic alternative to resource destruction. But that wasn't what they were about. They didn't want destruction. They wanted us to help them develop a conservation management plan that would sustain them for years down the road, generation after generation of indigenous people. They wanted their lifestyles to be able to remain the same. So not only did we train and employ people, but we also trained the people we trained to act as conservation educators themselves. So they would then go into the little indigenous schools, right, and teach the kids themselves. St. Louis Zoo was integral in developing conservation education materials for that aspect of the program to be used by them. And so here we come to Panama, right, where I came back from recently this past summer, in an area called Isla Colón. It's Colón Island. In an area called Boca del Drago. That just means mouth of the dragon, okay? And here's where I've worked off and on for about 15 years. I hadn't been there in 10 years, but before that I had worked there for some years. Sometimes I'd worked in places simultaneously, different countries simultaneously. So this is a school where I came back to after all those years of having been gone, and it was still the same. In this end of the island, it is inhabited by the Nobe people, right? And you might hear them referred to as Waimí, or the Nabe, or the Nobe Bugle. They are an indigenous group, and in Panama, 95% of the Nobe people earn, how much would you guess per year? Close, lower. $425. $425, 95% of the people. The vast majority of Nobe, and this is the same with many indigenous people, have 4 years of education, right? 4 years of education. So they really lack resources. It's so imperative for us who have a lot of resources and opportunities to share those with those less fortunate on the planet. We all benefit from that, I think, in the long run, right? So at this place, I'm used to working with this school and the director there, although I hadn't seen her for some years, and there's no electricity. So you see how dark the school is there, right? On a really cloudy day, when you go inside the school, you can't even see, it's so dark. There's barely enough light to see. There's no running water. The people are so poor that on occasion when I've gone, we put our money together and bought a tank of gas for them to cook. Because for a lot of the indigenous kids who go to the school, that's their one hot meal they'll get that day, right? They cook a grain, like a hot grain that we would call like malto meal, something like that, right? Nutritious and filling for the kids. So, and most of the kids have no supplies, right? If they have shoes. So, over the years I'd worked with the school system. I was real familiar with the school system and the teachers, most of whom, there are only 3, right? 2 of the 3 still there after all these years. And on one of my visits, I was teaching field courses again for university students, not only from the United States, but from other countries as well. So we started broadening sort of the scope of taking university students from other countries. Great cultural exchange and immersion into the community, so important. So here my students are again. They did a great job setting up different stations, education stations, and then all the students, right, and the teachers and any parents that wanted to were able to come down to the field station that day where the students were housed and participate in this program. We did it for about 6 years in a row, and the director of the school said to me one year when I was down there, she said, "Do you know that the kids here when you guys are coming back, and they know the day that the bus gets here, and they wait on the edge of the road for the bus to drive down the road because they know you're coming back. It's been a year, but they know you're coming back, right, for programs for them. So they're incredibly forthcoming and eager people, and so kind and generous. So we had a day where we fed them. We feed people almost all the time. We feed them. And then we also, again, it's important to instill pride. So we had a let's clean up the beach day. So that's not a bad place to work, is it, right? So you've got it's an island, so there's beach everywhere. It's gorgeous. And tropical rainforest, because that's my habitat. That's where, if I'm doing conservation work, I'm in conservation work in tropical forest areas. So we had a beach cleanup day. We cooked for them, and if we provide food, we do the cooking. We do everything. We do the purchase, we do the cooking, right? We serve them. That's the idea, right? We serve them. So now, this is the most recent trip. I came back to that school, and it was as though I'd never been gone, I must say. You know how you have those people you talk to, you haven't seen in years or something, and then you pick up the phone, and it's like you never, ever had that gap in the relationship. It's like you never left. That's how I felt when I went back. So I met with the teachers and the school director on day one. And I talked to them about, here's what I'd like to do. And she remembered me from previous years, rekindled that friendship, and she said, of course, right, let's implement the programs for the kids. Because these were kids that I'd never taught before, right? I taught kids previously, but they were long gone by this time that I was back here. So one of the first things I did was we gather all the kids around, and I talked to them about what's going on in the area. What are some of the issues that they're having? What are the resources? What's happening for them? And then based on availability, again, I develop education lessons and activities that I can leave with the teachers, right? It's a song, it's actions the kids can do, it's a piece of string. You know, I mean, you can do a lot with very little, and it has to be that because they just don't have the resources or the capability to keep those things going. So here, have all the kids out, and had to be outside, and it's still dark, okay? It's the rainforest. It's cloudy and rainy all the time. So here I am with one of the lessons and activities is teaching kids the parts of a plant and the importance of each part of the plant. So it's done to a little song, and right, so roots, stem, right, seeds. So you go through all the different aspects of a plant, and then that sticks in their brain. It has to be something they can relate to. It's all done in Spanish or the language, right, where we are working. Okay, and this just shows you some different types of activities. I don't know if you can see here. It's kind of difficult to see. It's kind of dark, but there is some string, what we call jute or cord, connecting all the students here together. And what I did was I collected calendars from a lot of people. And then I found all kinds of animal and plant pictures in the calendars, took all the pictures and took them down there with me. All right, so you can get real creative about what are we going to use for this? And a big giant ball of string, that's all it took, to teach them the idea of the web of life, the interconnectedness of everything out there. And it's easy, again, for teachers to implement those things once we're gone from the area. So another one, this is one of my favorites. This is one of the first education activities I ever developed in Costa Rica, is all about habitat destruction. So that when they hold hands and get big, they're a big giant forest, right? And then as trees are cut down, the forest gets smaller. And always my students have to participate because they get in the middle of the circle and they act like animals in the forest. So they have to act like monkeys and jaguars, and the kids get a kick out of that. Right, so we always participate in those kind of things. And then I had some helpers, right? That's my daughter, so she was helping. She was one of the animals. And then you can see, right, she's starting to cry, right? So she's in the circle and she has to leave because the forest is getting smaller and smaller. So we can easily bring home conservation points with very little, actually. And one of the main things is providing materials. And when I talked to the teachers and the director, she said, we don't have any chalk to write on the boards with. We don't have anything to write with. The kids don't have paper, the kids don't have pencils, and we could use chalk, but we wouldn't have any erasers. So we put our money together and went into town, because it's important to buy locally and support those economies, bought a bunch of school supplies, and came back and presented those supplies to the kids and the teachers, and the kids are super excited. You can see them holding up some of the supplies we brought. Right, there they are giving us the thumbs up, right? Wonderful relationships being built and hopefully continued in the future. And acknowledgments, I have to acknowledge, right, all the institutions and communities I've worked with in other countries to this time. Students and teachers of the school, the Escuela Boca del Drago, and of course the foundation. It was the college foundation that provided financial support for me to go back to Panama this summer and conduct that program, and I greatly appreciate that. Okay? And to me, these are win-win-win opportunities, right? The institution wins, the instructors win, and the recipients win, right? It's a feel-good thing. You get a lot of bang for your buck. It's a great investment. And there's one of our little guys, right, that wandered onto the field station in Venezuela. Took a picture. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We have questions for...
Anybody have any questions? Any? Yes.
If you feel a warm arm around your shoulders, it's my fourth grade teacher. She went to Central America somewhere and came back with nearly the same message, and we just didn't believe it. Nothing could be that bad.
But it can be, right? And you know that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much. Anybody else?
Astounding the partnerships you've formed throughout the years and what you helped make happen.
Thanks so much. I've had some great opportunities.
When you say that an indigenous group each year is lost, are those peoples, animal species, why?
I mean, we're losing one indigenous native group of people every year on the planet. They're going extinct. Yeah, so one of the big pushes in conservation is not only conserving biodiversity life forms, but conserving cultural diversity. So now big conservation institutions across the planet like Conservation International and World Wildlife Fund are designating what they call conservation hotspots globally. And they are, what the hotspots are those areas that they seek to preserve above all others. And those areas are usually have a huge an extremely complex diversity of life forms, super important, lots of biodiversity, and high cultural diversity that is threatened, right, with extinction. So both of those really important because indigenous people are so important for the knowledge base they bring us. They've been living off the land, you know, for generations. They're a wealth of knowledge and underestimated and extremely exploited, right, on the planet. Yes, ma'am.
How do you communicate with these indigenous people?
That's a good question. I usually learn a little bit of the language. You know, in some areas, like with the Nobe, I learned a little bit of Nobe, or Nabere, which is really the language. But in this area, they speak Spanish. So lucky for me, right? Because I learned Spanish a long time ago and speak in Spanish and conduct those programs in Spanish where appropriate. But you know, you'd be surprised in a lot of cases. I have students that I've taken down there that don't speak Spanish, and you learn quickly. The students pick up really quickly. When you're immersed and people are speaking Spanish, you'll learn much more quickly. And they're so gracious. I've not worked in any areas where the people aren't so gracious. If you make an attempt, they're appreciative, right? If you make an attempt. And some places I've learned, like I think it was in Nicaragua when I was working with the Mosquito and Mayagna people, there's no water, there's no electricity, there's no, you know, you're stopping the canoe and sleeping on the side of the river. First thing when I got into the Mosquito territory, I learned my first phrase, which was mosquito, for please, may I have some water? Because I was like dehydrated from no water. There's no water. There's no way to get anything. So out of necessity, right, also. But it's important to learn the basics, right? Hi, how are you? Good morning, good afternoon. And I think that's so significant. I love learning languages and communicating with people. I think to be involved in conservation, you really have to be a people person. I know some great researchers and great biologists, but they're not that effective at conservation because it's so much of a people discipline. You can be a great researcher, but very ineffective at conservation, you know, so I like, yes, ma'am.
These young students now, when they, you're teaching them, do they go back into their families and, teach what they have learned?
Yes.
Put it into process?
Well, putting it into process may be one thing, but I've heard from students all the time, I think in about every place I've been, that we go home and I've talked to my mom and dad about this, right? Or I've told my sister and brother about this. So the kids go home and communicate. How effective they are, one of the things that's important about continuing education and conservation education in particular is it can be difficult to change the minds and habits of adults, right? But kids get educated, they come home and they teach their parents and put a little pressure on the parents, and that can change things. But we tend to be pretty reticent as adults to change things ourselves. So they can be important factors in that trickle-down process.
Are they, do they have a harm to the environment with some of the things that they do in the certain areas in which we're trying to preserve?
Do the people, the groups we work with themselves?
No, the people that are out there living, and like the students that go back and maybe tell them that we're harming such and such.
Definitely, they are communicating that information. In a lot of areas, what's interesting is that indigenous people have been very successful historically at living off the land without eliminating the land and resources. But with influx and infiltration and pressure, and I was shocked when I was back into Panama on the island and I got close to the school, and there was an enormous open landfill that had been built down the road from the school, and I was like, oh my gosh, and the island is gorgeous, and I was like, how did that happen? Well, the town people didn't want it, so it was placed out there. So often the things that happen to them are not of their own doing, but it's the fact that they lack a lot of power in government, and they're just disenfranchised, they're easily exploited peoples with very little support, right, in governments nationally down to locally. Anybody else have anything? Yeah.
I was just curious, the presentation was fantastic.
Thank you.
The emphasis on Spanish.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if there's a student out there that would very much like to take your course, but hesitant simply because of an inability to speak the language.
Spanish. Well, not really, because almost all the classes that I talked about there are taught in English, but the locals speak Spanish. That just is, how much does a student want to be able to communicate, right, with community members and stuff. And students will learn, and a lot of them will bring...
They would be able to speak and understand English.
I'm sorry?
It's surprising that they would be able to understand English.
You mean the local people? No, if I'm doing programs and we're doing school programs for local people, it's always in their language. So my students sometimes, some of them, Spanish is more widespread in the US right now too, so more and more students are likely to at least know a little bit of Spanish. So they can be very helpful, but we always do it in the local language. And all the courses I've taught, for the most part, have been taught in English to university students or professionals, with the exception of the course we developed specifically for Latin American professionals. And that course itself was taught totally in Spanish. But then they were great role models to go into the local school system because they were Latinos and they were there going through our program and educating young Latinos, right, and Mayan individuals.
Did you have political problems in going into some of the countries? I'm thinking specifically now of Venezuela and its
Yeah, when I was working down there, and it was off and on for, I guess, maybe altogether 10 years. You know, I lived for a while down there, but I didn't live there for 10 years. I would live there for a couple of years, and then I would come back and go back and stay back and forth for months at a time. And I was there and sort of ending my programs just before Chavez was elected into the government. But I will tell you that as I'm not ever there promoting any kind of political party, and as long as we stay neutral, I've never found a situation in which I feel endangered or threatened or in any way for being there. And in most cases, in the jobs I've had, I make a concerted effort to go meet government officials, and in Nicaragua worked with some federal government officials and make sure that everybody's there and we're all understanding and playing nice. Everybody just needs to, it's like kindergarten, everybody just needs to play nice and get along. And we're all gonna get something great out of this, right? Anybody else have anything?
Patty McDaniel for Congress.
Yay, no.
Can we give Patty one more round of applause?
Thank you. Thanks so much.